Hey guys, what's cracking? Godspan here, coming at you with another deck profile. Today we're going to be talking about quite the hype new deck that's coming out, or rather I should say a deck retrain, as we got the brand new Unparalleled Drekasleif Varga Dragres Rakshasa coming out in DZBT05 Omniscient Awakening. So this new card is an upgrade to the regular Varga Dragres that we got in DZBT01, and oh my, it is quite the upgrade, might I say. At first people were a little bit, I should say, underwhelmed by this card, but after a little bit of deck testing and really understanding the nuance that Drekasleif brings to the table, it's become quite clear that this is probably going to be one of the strongest new decks coming out in the DZBT05 format. And so I wanted to bring you guys a deck profile today to get you started on your journey of cutting down everyone around you as the true unparalleled Vanguard. So let's go ahead and get right into it. I hope you enjoy. With the ride line being our starting point, the grade 0 can be whatever you want, so we'll be running Heated Blade Ardart because this was the one that came with Varga Dragres, simple as that. However, moving over to the grade 1, we're going to be running the, not Blaze Ardart, if you can believe it, but rather Rising Star Vyrgilla. Now, this has the skill that during your turn on the Vanguard circle, it gets 2,000 power for each of your rear cards. Furthermore, when you would ride from the ride deck, you can Soul Blast instead of discarding. This is a very impressive card. Not only does it utilize Soul as a way to refund you a card, thus making it a plus by transitive property, this also lets you go for some really big early beatdowns should you have multiple grade 1s or zeros if you're really going that hard to bring to bear against the opponent. It's a great way to add to your aggro as a rush deck because Varga Dragres still is very much an aggressive kind of deck. Maybe a little bit more burst oriented with the inclusion of the turn 4 play of Drekasleif, but it's still very aggressive regardless. So Vyrgilla helps you out in the early game quite a bit, and Soul is such an easy resource anyway that it's super preferential to Blaze Ardart, which was not a very impactful plus. It was just a 10k booster, and the Soul Charge could honestly mess you up more than it could help you sometimes, so we're going to be running Vyrgilla instead. However, we're back to the Varga ride line traditional with Boulder Axe Dragon. Boulder Axe being able to call itself to the rear guard circle and net you a +1 as well as a 50k beater is super nice, albeit it is another thing that's pulling out from your soul. So between this and Vyrgilla, you're not going to be having a lot of soul to start with, so do be careful about that. There's not a lot of cards that Soul Blast in this deck. As a matter of fact, I don't think any card here except for one of the new ones actually Soul Blast inherently, so you should be fine regardless, but still, should you choose to make edits that utilize the soul, this could be a choke point for you. Now, moving on to the main grade 3 himself, we are running Varga Dragres, the Fated One of Unparalleled. I'm not really going to discuss his effects very much, but what I will say about the Fated One of Unparalleled here is that he's only going to be one copy in the ride deck. We're not going to be running in the main deck because we instead have the brand new cross ride Unparalleled Drekasleif. But still, Varga Dragres is a very impressive Vanguard. Being able to get the multi-attack and also potentially proc the Divine Skill is very, very harsh against the opponent. One thing I do want to note is that because Varga Dragres' Divine Skill can be used when going second, you may actually want to opt for it. Bear in mind that even though Drekasleif also has a Divine Skill, you can only use one Divine Skill between Varga Dragres and Drekasleif. You can't use them just because they're different Divine Skills. So you'll have to make a choice between the two. And on that note, I must say that if you are looking to end the game quickly and you have a really good momentum, let's say you twin drive a couple triggers including crit, you may want to opt for this Divine Skill right off the bat and not wait for Drekasleif because it could be a golden opportunity to end your opponent right off the bat. I do just want to bring that to bear that it is a strategy. However, at all honesty, I would still suggest waiting for turn 4 most of the time, but if opportunity knocks, you might take it. Now, going over to the main deck, let's talk about the big kahuna, Unparalleled Drekasleif Varga Dragres Rakshasa. So this unit comes with 3 new effects, although one of them is hardly an effect, that being the first one. It's called Malworm Auto. When this unit is placed by riding from a unit with Varga and its different card name from this unit, or from a unit in the Malworm state, until end of this fight, this unit is in the Malworm state, and if Persona Ride was not activated by this ride, activate Persona Ride. Effectively, it's like Linnorn Vivash, if you remember that from set 13, which gives you this sort of state of being which turns your effects online. It's a way of differentiating this Varga and also give it its own in-theme support, because the in-theme support will just ask for Malworm state in order to get enhanced effects. So it is kind of clever how they did it, although some people don't kind of like how arbitrary this placement of the skill is, but I think it's still pretty good for card design philosophy overall. But effectively, it is still just Persona riding Varga Dragres like any other, and we're running at 4 copies, so you can consider it as running 4 copies of Persona Ride without having to use up your Regardless Piece slot for Gradius Cradle, which is quite important because we have a much better Regardless Piece slot to use that for. Now, the second skill skill of Drekasleif states that auto on the Vanguard circle once per turn. When this unit in the Malworm state attacks a Vanguard, you retire all of your front row rear guards and this unit gets 10,000 power to end a turn. Note, that part of the effect is automatic and free. It will activate no matter what, so you can't opt not to do it because there's no cost associated with it. Then, at the end of the battle, you counterblast 1 to retire all back row rear guards. Stand this unit and it gets drive -2 until end of turn. This is just like the Varga Dragres effect that we got from set 1, except even better. Because not only do you get the field control element and the 10k for free, which means you can't be choked out of that part of the effect by lacking CB, but when you do the restands, you also get to wipe out all the back row. And while some people at first really underestimated this effect, the fact of the matter is that there's a lot of valuable back row that people bring to bear in standard format. And one of the common strategies against Varga Dragres' front row wipe was to actually keep key cards in the back row where it would be safe. So this says nothing is safe now, a very impressive field control element, might I say. And it still maintains the same restand and same power line, so it's just objectively a superior skill to the original. Speaking of which, we've got the Divine skill, which is also objectively superior. Auto on the Vanguard circle. At the end of the battle, this unit attacked, and this unit stand by this unit's original auto ability this turn. Counterblast 1, stand this unit, and it gets drive +2. So just like it is with Varga Dragres, it's a third attack, and it retains the twin drive for this attack. But the key difference, the #1 difference that makes it so much better, is that it doesn't care what your opponent's damage is at. Thus, even if they've been trying to zone you out by staying at 3 or less damage the entire game, this doesn't care. It will still go burr and close out the game then and there. A very impressive upgrade to the Divine skill, and one that leaves little counterplay from the opponent. And as a matter of fact, let's also keep in mind that because of the back row retires, this entire philosophy to the card seems to be no more counterplaying Varga. You must endure the full sacrifice, the full hardship of his blade. So yeah, a very impressive cross ride all around, and one that we're going to be maxing out at 4 copies. Moving on, another grade 3 is Twinpulsive Dragon at 4 copies. Twinpulsive helps us tutor grade 2 or less cards to the field, and it's a way of utilizing Energy Blast in an efficient manner. Probably our best Energy Blaster in the deck, if I'm being completely honest. And also, when it's retired, you can give 5k to your Vanguard, which if you're going for the Divine skill turn is a triple dip for up to 15k for free. So overall, very impressive card. It's just one of our staple rear guards at this point. Finally, for grade 3 rear guards, we've got 2 Obduracy Glaive Dragon. This guy's been a staple ever since set 1 just about, although it is a bit of an optional run at this point because we are having a little bit of a heavy grade 3 count, but there's actually a reason why we're doing that, and we'll get into that later. Obduracy Glaive has the ability to not be retired by card effects and gets 10,000 powers once it's the front row, or it can be a booster in the back row. One thing I want to know about Obduracy Glaive, however, is because Varga Dragres wipes out both back rows now when it restands the first time around, you will not want to put Obduracy Glaive as a booster because he will be eradicated. He doesn't get his retire resist in the back row, only in the front row. So if you're going to call him out, please call him out as an attacker, not a booster. The final grade 3 of the deck is Radiance Caliburn, which is our current regardless piece. It has the ability to either draw 2 cards or, much more importantly, put into Soul and countercharge 1. Now, when it comes to resources, I said before that Soul is pretty easy, and similarly as we see with Twinpulsive, while energy is definitely used, energy is not a choke point whatsoever because your main Vanguard only costs Counterblast. And might I say, Counterblast is, in fact, the choke point of this deck. Not only are you counterblasting twice for the Divine skill turn with just Varga Dragres alone, we're still going to be running the key multi-attack to the deck Shuura in order to get even more aggressive multis on the board, and that costs a Counterblast each as well. So just like it was with the original Varga, Counterblast is coming all over the place, and we don't really have a lot of countercharge options in order to pay that back. We do have things like Gojo and Ethan, of course, but those are RNG reliance. They require your Vanguard to hit, which your opponent can just prevent straight out, thus you don't get the countercharge. This is basically our only reliable way of getting a countercharge without needing to go through a bunch of hoops and hurdles in order to achieve it. And even though it's a neg-1 when you do it, it also happens to supply a soul, which if you're using soul quite aggressively could be super useful. So overall, just a super pivotal resource card that can honestly save some games for you. Moving on to the grade 2 count, I just referenced her before, but we're running 4 copies of Dragritter Shuura. Shuura allows you to not just get that multi-attack I was talking to you about before, being able to call itself back after being retired for a counterblast, but Shuura actually has a super nifty energy blast skill, where you can give 5k to the unit and then bounce back something else that ends up getting retired by your Vanguard's ability. So that's a super nifty skill because not only will you be able to reuse a bunch of different cards, but in this particular version of the deck, giving that to some back row is super nice, as now your back row is also in danger of being wiped out unless they have some way of either retiring themselves beforehand or benefiting in some way from the retires in it themselves. So this is just even more valuable than ever. And I must say that if you do have to put an Obduracy Glaive in the back row, you can save Obduracy Glaive using Dragritter's Energy Blast skill, so there is still a good way to make it a booster, but it's a very piece-reliant way, and I would suggest if you have better maneuvers, try to build for a different board state than that. But, you know, sometimes you have what you have, and you have to make the best out of your board, so we'll do that if we have to. Moving on, the other 4 of grade 2 we got is Dragritter Farhat. This is just the energy cycler, so you discard it and you draw a card when you discard from riding. It has a really nifty skill if you Persona Road, which allows you to get a grade 1 from the drop zone. And we do, of course, have Rokusei, we're going to talk about in a moment, which is our main grade 1. But this deck also received a new grade 1 for Varga Dragres Rakshasa that's pretty pivotal, albeit you probably don't need to revive it because it has a way of bringing itself back multiple times in the game. However, you still may need to call it out if you had to discard it earlier, and so you don't have a copy there. So this is a pretty versatile revive skill that you can go for. There's a few things that you could revive and feel pretty good about. So that's why we're going to run it at 4 of. And also, even though we are using energy for Twinpulsive and Shuura already, it is pretty nice to be able to have an energy blast to get you advantage in the early game, because sometimes you may want to rush down the opponent, but you are rushed down instead, and you're going to need as much card advantage as possible to not get blown out of the game in the early game, and this is the only way to get a lot of early game advantage while you're riding up. For the final grade 2, we're running a 1-of copy of Defensing Roar. This is a super clutch defensive order that allows you to bounce back one of your guardians as long as it isn't a sentinel after you're done guarding with them, and get shield plus 10,000 in the process. This has a few different use cases. One of the use cases beforehand was to use it with Galnet, which was a 20k shield, but we actually have a situational 20k shield that's different from Galnet in the deck, but also a lot more free potentially, so we're going to be running that instead. But there's also the usual case scenarios of calling a trigger down there, or by god, if you happen to draw into the OT, you can call down the OT and then bounce it back to your hand, thus making it a 60k guard that you can then throw down for another 50k on the following attack. It's a super clutch defending operate, like I said before, and although it is technically a tech card in the deck, it's such a powerful tech card that I would fully recommend running this at least at a copy or 2. Now, moving on to the grade 1s, we have 4 of Battlemonk the Raging Flames Rokusei. Rokusei prevents intercepts for the opponent, which is as good as it's ever been, if not better, because now preventing back row intercepts is super important, because you're going to end up wiping out those back row as well. So sorry, Catalyst, you still suck for Reziel. It has a second skill though, that when any player's front row unit is retired, you can also retire this unit in order to draw a card. This became more important than ever because, as I said before, you're going to be wiping out your back row Drekasleif, so you're going to want to get rid of this guy ahead of time and get some advantage out of it before he ends up dying for no reason. So overall, just as synergistic as it's ever been before, and mandatory for, if I say. Now, moving on to a couple of the new grade 1s, we have 3 of Storm Slasher Dragon. Now, Storm Slasher bears the ability that when it's retired by the ability of your grade 3 or greater Vanguard the Varga in its card name, you can call it for free to the back row rear circle as rest. If your Vanguard is in the Malworm state, you can Soul Blast 1 and stand this unit. Furthermore, if your Vanguard's in the Malworm state, you get 5,000 power to this unit, and it's active even during the opponent's turn. So yeah, just a continuous 13k booster once you're on Drekasleif, but even before that, it's just a booster that can recur itself back for free. Of course, you won't have it boost you multiple times unless you're Soul Blasting and you're in Malworm, but like I said before, this is going to be the only thing in this deck that you're Soul Blasting for. So as long as you're riding every turn, you can keep using this effect, and even without that, you still get 1 effectively free use of this effect before you're going to have to, no, even 2, because we have to bear in mind that once you ride to grade 4, you should still have 1 in the ride line of Varga and the Soul, and you don't actually need to keep Varga and the Soul for any effects. So as a result, this can just more or less get repeated ad infinitum, and you shouldn't choke on your Soul Blast with this because your opponent shouldn't be living long enough for you to have to choke on this Soul Blast. So just a super good card that even at base, just being able to recur this card back to the field is very nifty, and in a compromised game state, you can call to the front row and retire with Varga Dragres, and then it'll call itself back to the back row so that it'll be in prime position to support your Rakshasa on the following turn. Very versatile, very easy, very good. The final main deck grade 1 to talk about, well, aside from PGs, I guess, is Summit Flare Dragon. Now, this card has the continuous skill that if your G-Zone has no cards, it gets the skill of Act in the Hand. If you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, you pitch this card and put a total of 2 cards from your soul or drop that were in the right deck were in the right deck into the right deck face up. So very much like it was with Galnet, but this also has to pitch itself. Now you look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 grade 3 or greater card with a different card name from your Vanguard from among them, reveal it, put in your hand, and shuffle the deck. If you're not reveal a card, put this card in the hand. This is the main effect that we're using this for, because as I said before, we're running a fair bit of grade 3s, and that's because Summon Flare can search out your grade 3s, and that includes the Regardless piece, bear in mind. It's just a grade 3 or greater card with a different card name from your Vanguard. Obviously, we won't have an order as a Vanguard, so it should always be searchable. Do note as well that Rakshasa actually has a different name from Varga. It triggers Persona Ride by effect, not because it shares the same name. Thus, you can search this while you're on the grade 3 Varga as a way to guarantee your cross Persona Ride. And even if you do have that, you can also get Twinpulsive, you can get Obduracy, Glaive, a few different targets, and they're all really good. So Summon Flare has a lot of utility in this deck. It has a secondary skill that was put on the Guardian Circle. If your opponent's drop has 4 or more cards, a super easy condition might I add, then it gets 5k shield, thus being a 10k shielder. But if your opponent G-Zone has a card, that you can bind a grade 3 or greater card from your solar drop, and this unit gets plus 10,000 until end of that battle. So against stride heavy metas, this is just as good as Galnet, actually better because it's free compared to Galnet. So you can recur this, and then on top of that, if you happen to have a defensing roar, you can actually defensing roar this and then call it down again for a second helping of that sweet, sweet shield. So overall, a very versatile card, has both defense and consistency variables to it that I really like, and as a result, we're going to be running it as a very solid 3-up in the deck. For some of the deck generics, we're going to, of course, be running 3 PGs along with 1 Elementaria Sanctitude, nothing to talk about here. For our trigger lineup, we're going to be running 8 critical triggers. You can run effects or not, it's either or. I ended up running 4 effects just cause, but again, Soul is not a choke point for you, so you don't really care about that. And we're running 3 draw triggers of Flare Veil Dragon. We want to draw into pieces because the more pieces that you have, the better your offense is going to be, and you need to kill rather quickly because that's just the whole winning image of this deck. So you don't really need fronts because of just the massive power of your board anyway, but you can run fronts if you prefer. I just prefer to see pieces in this deck. For our heal triggers, we're going to be running 4 normal heals because effect heals are just not very reliable. You don't really need to get super creative with your heal triggers, but you can if you want to use them as another clutch defensing roar combo. So you could use like the attack 2 or more time heal trigger if you know that's going to be heavy in the meta, and then defensing a roar back and call it down again. So again, very versatile blitz order that you can do a lot of different plays with it. So do bear those in mind when you're making your trigger selection. And then finally, we're going to be running a Eidos Pharaoh. I know in the anime they got really cute with it, putting in drag meta, but overall I think Eidos Pharaoh is still way to go. Giving you a 9th crit in the deck is super important because you have a double if not triple attacking Vanguard, so that critical will have super big mileage at the end of the day. But adding any card from your drop zone is also very nice. You can get back a discarded piece, you can try and get back a wildly important card like Defensing Roar, because this is a 1-up Defensing Roar. So if you actually do get Defensing Roar back, then that's another way to reenact those defending combos I was talking about before. You could try to get back a copy of your Vanguard if you had to pitch a Rakshasa early for some reason. This is just a super versatile card that also gets you the oh so important 9th crit. So overall, I would say this is by far the best OT for this deck. Now to round things off, let's go ahead and give some grades real quick. For power, we're going to get a fat 5 out of 5. This deck is one of the premier aggro decks of the format. It's all about killing your opponent quickly and with overwhelming pressure. And just having a triple attacking Vanguard swing on turn 4 with 33k power minimum without any other boost, just its own effects, is a lot for your opponent to ask for. And if you're able to clutch out the CP4 play, you're looking at a 7 attack turn with every attack being about 25k minimum. And this isn't even including back row boosting for any of them or trigger effects. Yeah, it's just one of the strongest offenses that we have in the format, no doubt about it. Defense gets a very nice 4 out of 5 as well. It has plenty of advantage lines, and you also have some really good added elements of bolstering up your hand. Defensing Roar is hyper clutch, as I mentioned before, but even other stuff like being able to bounce back cards from your field to your hand using Shuura's Energy Blast 2 is another way of bolstering your hand. And a lot of your cards like Boulder Axe and Rokusei do end up drawing cards by retiring themselves, so you could be looking at a pretty chonky hand to defend the opponent with in a lot of cases. It's not 5 out of 5 because it doesn't really prioritize defense compared to offense, so sometimes you could be a little bit lacking because you're trying to maintain your board as much as possible, but overall it's definitely hard to put down if you put your mind to it. Consistency is also pretty nice at a 3 out of 5, probably its lowest score, however, because the deck is very piece reliant. You have a lot of pieces that are pretty hard to search out, aside from maybe your grade 3s, but it's relying on seeing Summon Flare, which is perhaps another piece in of itself when you think about it. And if you happen to lose pieces to the drop zone by ways other than retiring, it's hard to get it back aside from Idle Sfaro. So yeah, I'd say that sometimes you won't have the optimal board state by the time you need to go, and you don't really have a lot of time in your hands. As soon as turn 3 goes around, you want to be about as aggressive as you possibly can. So as anyone will tell you, if you happen to not see your Shuuras in the game, you're looking kind of dicey there. But still, the thing that saves this for being a 3 out of 5 is that it still has some really good dig power and ways of searching like certain cards, albeit not deliberately, but just off like top 5, top 7 kind of searches. It is still a Vanguard centric deck, so even with a somewhat mid board, Varga Dragres can do a lot of the lion's share of the attacking. So I'd say it evens out to a pretty nice 3 out of 5. Recovery is a solid 4 out of 5 because again, you have a lot of ways to dig cards, but you also have the self-bounce skills in order to be able to retain important pieces like Rokusei back in your hand. You have cards that will actually come back after retiring, such as Storm Slasher and Shuura. Just a lot of ways to maintain a pretty solid board all around. It's not the best in the world because there's not like there's not ways of deliberately keeping cards aside from like the self bounce, and sometimes if you happen to hit a lot of triggers, that means that your hand is mostly full of triggers, and there's not ways of deliberately calling your units from other places like drop or field other than maybe the skill of Twinpulsive, but even that's just a top 5, so it's prone to whiffing. So it's not perfect recoverability, but you do have a lot of ways of reestablishing a pretty good board all around, so it's a 4 out of 5. Economy is a 3 out of 5 though, and see, here's the thing. Energy, pretty easy. Soul, super easy. CB, hell. Like, straight up. Every CB is going to be going to your offense, and they're very crucial offense pieces. You need a CB per turn for Varga, 2 if you're using Divine Skill, 3 if you're using Shuura, 4 if you're using double Shuura, and you only have 1 counter charge in this entire deck, which is very harsh. So, not too long ago, I gave Impaldio a 4 out of 5 because even though it had pretty similar reliance on CB, it had a counter charge in the form of Bulba Mine. This deck doesn't benefit from that, so it's going to have to take the hard 3 out of 5. The only reason why it's not higher is because Soul and Energy are still really easy, and you can use those to get a lot of good advantage or pressure point, but also your Varga Dragres Rakshasa doesn't need to CB for the first effect unless you intend to do the restand. So at bare minimum, you can still play a very control-centric game plan without having to use this counterblast in case you're trying to wait for a better opportunity next turn and maybe rack up some more damage. So it does have some counterplay around CB choke, but it is still very much a choke point. And finally, we got control, which is 5 out of 5. Let me just keep it simple. Varga Dragres Rakshasa nukes the field every single turn. Enough said. No, seriously, 1 counterblast wipes out potentially 5 of your opponent's rear guards, just like that. This is about as good as control as you could possibly ask for in this format right now, and I won't be told otherwise. So yeah, easy 5 out of 5. Accumulating all these scores together and just taking the context of the format, I'm going to give Varga a very strong A. This deck is phenomenal. So much power, so much aggression, and still a fair bit of consistency and recoverability and a ton of control to add in the mix. This deck has pretty much got it all, man, and it's going to end up being one of the best decks in this format post set 5, if I do say so myself. So definitely be on the lookout because the evil dragon is coming for you, and when he strikes, no one's leaving the battlefield unscathed. I hope you liked this deck profile. If you did, then be sure to check out my other deck profiles in the channel down below. And if you're looking for other Vanguard content, then I've got loads of it right here. It's a one-stop shop for just that. We're talking anime reaction. Season 2 just concluded, so do check out that anime reaction watch along if you haven't already. We've got fight nights, top 10s, the whole shebang, so check them out. And with that said, take care, God bless.